Hello. On Sunday we celebrated Pentecost, God's gift of the Holy Spirit, or said in a more Trinitarian way, God as the Holy Spirit. The Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, 10 days after Jesus' ascension was poured out in a new way to be with us personally and corporately, to lead us into all truth, to empower us to do what God does and say what God says. Do you think it's possible that we regularly misinterpret Pentecost? I mean, actually not just misinterpret it a little, but generally get Pentecost completely backwards? I mean, honestly, I suspect we've heard the story of the wind and the tongues of flame and the dove and the crowds and the languages, just enough to believe that the promise of Pentecost is all deliverance, celebration, victory, and strength. And what is the Holy Spirit, after all, if it's not the very Spirit of the resurrected Jesus, one of the three persons of the Trinity, now on earth to accompany us with signs of wonder and power? The Spirit is that other Paraclete Jesus promised that would be with them as he was when he was here on earth. Except that precisely because the promised Holy Spirit is the presence of the crucified and resurrected Christ, we should never expect things to be so easy. In the cross of Christ, we see God's strength made known through suffering, God's victory achieved through defeat, and new life promised and provided through death. The crucified and resurrected God we meet in Jesus is a God of paradox, and so we should look for no less in God's Holy Spirit. So I want to hold up for you to think about two of the paradoxes of Pentecost. First, the Holy Spirit does not come to solve our problems, but to create them. I mean, think about it. If not for the coming of the Holy Spirit, the disciples could go back to their previous careers as fishermen. But once the Spirit comes, though, that return to normalcy is no longer an option. They will now be propelled throughout the ancient world to proclaim the unlikely message that God has redeemed the world through an itinerant preacher who was executed for treason and blasphemy. The Holy Spirit, you see, doesn't solve the disciples' problems. It creates them. New York Times columnist David Brooks challenged new college graduates one year to forego the American obsession with self-fulfillment and instead find themselves in service to others by making and keeping what he described as sacred commitments, and by rising to the challenges they discover all around and outside of them. Most successful young people, he writes, don't look inside and then plan a life. They look outside and find a problem which summons their life. Most people don't form a self and then lead a life. They are called by a problem, and the self is constructed gradually by their calling. I believe the same is true of a community. We as congregations will discover ourselves, as we give ourselves away, asking questions like, who needs us? And what can we do with our resources to bear God's love to this part of the world? Paradox 2. The Holy Spirit does not prevent failure, but invites it. Or, to put it a little differently, the Holy Spirit invites us to find fulfillment and victory in and through our setbacks and failures. I know you've heard the failure is not an option line from Apollo 13, but I think that kind of mindset is paralyzing to many of us as members of Christian communities. Failure is not only an option, it's inevitable. The problems this world, and we as a congregation face are too great, too complex, too significant to imagine that we'll hit upon the best solution the first time out, or maybe ever. In approaching whatever challenges are before us, we have to experiment and count on failing, have to innovate and count on failing, and invent and count on failing again. Each mistake, each setback, each false start, each failure is not to be lamented, but learned from. Because ultimately, it's neither about us nor up to us. God's the creator, sustainer, and redeemer of this cosmos, and only God can bring the kind of redemption we long for and the world needs. Our job is to partner with God's work wherever we can discern it. If the cross teaches us nothing else, it teaches that success will not always look like success, and victory may often come disguised as defeat. The question isn't whether we're successful, but whether we're faithful. Success is God's job. Seen this way, we can find a measure of freedom to throw ourselves into lost causes, to place ourselves on the side of those who are most vulnerable, and to take great risks, always trusting in God's good promises. Resurrection, we need to remember, only and always follows crucifixion. We've been joined by our baptism into communities of faith that look for and expect the Holy Spirit to come alongside us and shake things up. Yes, and causing problems, but also preparing and equipping each and all of us to share the disruptive, surprising, and life-giving word of grace of the God who will not rest until all people enjoy abundant life. Jesus says, "Go and make disciples. And when you care for the least of these, you're caring for me. And love one another as I've loved you." And this kind of work is inherently disruptive and difficult, and at times even dangerous. And so Jesus sends the paradoxical paraclete, the one who comes alongside us to encourage, equip, strengthen, provoke, and, yes, when we need it, to comfort us, so that we can get out there and do it all again. See you soon.